A young woman who won a beauty contest was found in her own apartment. The police began searching for the culprit, not suspecting what consequences all this would lead to. Today, we will tell you what happened to Sheila Jo Harris and why this case has outraged the public. Sheila Jo Harris was born on February 26, 1963, in Douglas County, Nevada. From an early age, the girl wanted to become an actress or a model, so she actively participated in various beauty contests even during her school years. When she was little, her parents divorced, and her mother remarried another man. Later they had 2 more daughters, and Sheila actively helped her mother take care of her younger sisters. In high school, Sheila won a local beauty contest in her county. After that, she planned to compete for Miss Nevada and Miss Carson City titles. If successful, she intended to apply for participation in the national beauty pageant. Despite such ambitious plans, the girl decided to pursue higher education in business and trade. After graduating from high school at the age of 18, Sheila moved to Carson City and enrolled at a local community college. She rented an apartment and took on part-time work at a supermarket to cover living expenses. Sheila approached both studying and working with maximum responsibility because she wanted to have a good education and support herself independently. Sheila also dated a guy named Steve. They tried to see each other as often as possible, but due to their studies and work commitments, could only spend time together several times a week. On January 4, 1982, Sheila went over his house just check up on him since he recently broke his arm. They spent evening with him and his parents, after which she headed home. Next day, when it was time for morning shift at supermarket, she didn't show up. Store manager noticed absence and got worried as this girl never once arrived late even by minute. He called on her home phone, but there was no answer. Then he contacted Sheila's mother asking if something might have happened with Sheila. Initially, mom thought maybe Sheila overslept alarm clock, but when store manager mentioned calling on home phone, the woman got nervous. She decided to go visit Sheila herself and asked friend to accompany, fearing worse going alone. Arriving at residential complex with spare set keys, friend entered apartment first, where horrifying sight awaited them, causing scream out loud. Sheila lay lifeless, bed surrounded blood. Friend tried stop girl's mom, seeing heart-wrenching scene, yet eventually entered room, saw dead daughter. Police officers arriving scene started examining crime scene, immediately realizing that girl had been strangled, also received severe blows. Heavy object found dent wall next bed, presumably left by Sheila trying fend off attacker. Medical experts concluded that the girl was bound and subjected to violence. The criminal struck her several times, presumably with a plank or another heavy piece of wood. After that, he strangled her with an electrical cable, which became the cause of death. The investigator failed to find either the plank or the cable in the apartment. However, they noticed that a wire had been torn from a table lamp, which could have been used as a murder weapon. Experts were able to extract biological material from the perpetrator, but could not conduct DNA testing in 1982. Initially, detectives thought that this crime could have been committed without preparation, and that the perpetrator might have been mentally unstable. This idea was prompted by how cruelly he dealt with his victim. However, it quickly became apparent that the attack was meticulously planned. Firstly, no signs of forced entry were found on the door. This meant Sheila must have let the perpetrator in herself. Secondly, none of the neighbors in the multi-story residential building heard anything. The killer must have carefully planned each step to carry out such a brutal crime without making a sound. Furthermore, he took both wire and wooden plank with him, depriving police of 2 important pieces of evidence. All this led investigators to believe that this was not the perpetrator's first attack. Perhaps they were dealing with a serial killer or someone who began preparing their plan long before executing it. With almost no physical evidence at hand, investigators began searching for witnesses. They questioned all residents of the building, but none noticed anything suspicious that night. The area where Sheila lived was on outskirts of town and considered less safe. She chose this apartment because rent prices were low. as her part-time job at supermarket wouldn't cover housing costs in more prestigious areas. This complicated police work, since many people living there had some connection to criminal activities one way or another. For a month after murder, investigators thoroughly studied local residents trying to determine who might be involved in killing. As a result, they interrogated around 70 men, but couldn't establish their involvement. From early days, police had most obvious suspect, Sheila's boyfriend Steve. Statistics show close ones often commit such crimes, since Steve may be last person seen girl before murder said he escorted her home. But detectives didn't rush into believing him blindly. He lacked alibi for arrest. They couldn't confirm if really hadn't entered Sheila's flat during investigation. Another problem arose. Local media learned detectives viewed Steve as suspect. Journalists quickly discovered boy's family closely tied law enforcement. His brother is Sheriff Carson City. Father held same position until retirement. As a result, newspapers started speculating whether cops covering up young girls' murder. Townspeople practically convinced Steve behind crime. His brother father, using positions connections, buried case. LED protests sent angry letters, threats against Steve relatives. Residents of Carson City demanded that he be immediately arrested, and someone was already insisting on the death penalty. The situation was further exacerbated by the fact that just a few days after the murder, Steve was arrested for being on the street in a state of severe alcohol intoxication. Nevertheless, investigators tried to determine if the guy had a motive for committing such a crime. After talking to Sheila's friends, they concluded that the couple never had any serious problems, and the girl never complained about aggression from his side. In addition, the victim suffered serious injuries that would have required tremendous effort from the killer. At that time, Steve had a broken arm, making all this practically impossible. As a result, detectives began to lean towards believing in the innocence of the guy. However, it was already too late. Under pressure from public opinion, threats and constant accusations, Steve took his own life without ever waiting for that moment when he would be completely removed from the list of suspects. After this incident, there remained only one candidate for the role of murderer: David Mitchell, a gardener and odd-job man who was assigned to Sheila's residential complex. There were no direct evidence against him, but several indirect factors made investigators suspicious of him. Firstly, as a repairman, he could enter any apartment in complex. Secondly, shortly after murder, he quit his job and left in an unknown direction. Police tried to locate him, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. When suspicion regarding Mitchell started growing stronger, detectives re-interviewed residents of complex and other employees, trying to find out if anyone noticed strange or suspicious behavior on part of Gardner. Indeed, some witnesses told police officers that Mitchell couldn't take his eyes off pretty girls passing by, silently watching them until they disappeared out sight. Several tenants found it strange, which led investigators more inclined towards belief that it was him who killed Sheila. The man was declared wanted, but over the next few years authorities failed to get any leads about his whereabouts. Meanwhile, forensic experts came up with another trump card: a hair found at victim's apartment, which could belong to Mitchell. He hailed from small island nation Trinidad and Tobago. Experts confirmed ethnic match between found hair and suspect, though DNA analysis wasn't available back then, so 100% match with Mitchell's DNA couldn't be determined. In 1986, 4 years post-murder, police finally got tip-off about location where man resided outside state boundaries, leading arrests. Soon after interrogation, Mitchell denied guilt during questioning, having only one ASAP detective Sleeves hair presumably belonging him. Suspect claimed cleaning same apartment month before Sheila moved in, explaining presence hair there. Investigators still believed it was him who killed girl, yet lacked solid evidence, realizing case had zero chances. Court hence decided release Mitchell, since no judge would convict based solely on single strand hair possibly left behind during cleaning duty. There have been no developments in this case since then. Investigators were convinced that Mitchell was the killer, so they didn't really try to find other suspects. But they couldn't prove the man's guilt, so the investigation soon came to a standstill. It was only resumed in 1999, after 13 years. Sheila's mother heard about how new DNA analysis technologies could help solve such crimes and contacted the detective in charge of the case. The woman persuaded him to send the killer's biological material to the laboratory and request a comparison with Mitchell's blood, which he had provided after questioning in 1986. After a long wait, investigators finally received the long-awaited results. The semen sample from the victim's body matched David Mitchell's DNA completely. Experts also confirmed that his hair was found at the victim's apartment. Thus, police obtained 100% confirmation of his guilt. However, another problem awaited them here. Mitchell had left for his homeland from USA, where he got a job as a security guard at a government institution. Now investigators had to secure his extradition, which proved to be quite problematic. They needed to navigate through all bureaucratic hurdles and convince Trinidad and Tobago government that it was indeed Mitchell who committed this murder. This process took several years, as federal authorities and state government engaged in dialogue with another country over next 7 years, until finally decision on extradition wasn't made until 2006. The suspect was brought back to Carson City, and one of most high-profile court cases in state history began shortly thereafter. Firstly, DNA analysis wasn't as widely used back then as it is now, and this technology still raised some doubts within society. Secondly, journalists paid much attention because victim Steve ended up taking his own life to false accusations against him. Now court had to decide whether David was truly guilty, or if whole town wrongly believed Steve was responsible. Mitchell's lawyer used these doubts strategically, insisting that Steve might have been actual murderer, while DNA analysis could be flawed. Prosecution refuted these arguments, providing unequivocal evidence showing modern-day DNA testing has minimal chances of error. Moreover, they presented indirect evidence. On day of murder, Steve had cast on arm, making it unlikely for him cause injuries using just one hand. Plus, there were no gypsum particles found at crime scene. But those weren't only prosecution arguments during trial. For first time, they revealed information not previously disclosed publicly. Mitchell already faced criminal charges for 5 episodes violence against women, including being sentenced 10 years prison late 60s New York, attacking 3 girls, their homes, breaking, entering, tying them up, electric cable, subjecting violence upon them after release, moved California where broke into house, 2 sisters attempted assault but managed fight off, called police, arrested months later, and here most interesting part began. Despite the previous sentence, the man received only 3 years in prison, of which he served 1.5, and was released early. He was supposed to be deported back to his homeland, but the man disappeared from police view, moved to Carson City, and got a job as a gardener in that same complex. All these facts not only outraged Sheila's family, but also the public. If the system hadn't allowed him to get out so early, the girl would most likely still be alive. The management of the residential complex is also implicated because unknowingly they hired a serial rapist who had escaped from police custody. Investigators' work also raised questions after Sheila's murder. They had no idea about Mitchell's criminal history. According to the prosecution's version, on the evening of Sheila's murder, David knocked on her door and said he needed to do some repair work. He should have had a board with him which he used to stun his victim. Mitchell then committed all these atrocities against her, and left taking the board and electrical cable with him from the crime scene. As a result, it took jurors just 30 minutes to unanimously find David guilty of killing the girl. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole rights. However, his lawyer tried for more lenient conditions, arguing that for 25 years after committing murder, Mitchell had reformed himself, living an honest life without harming anyone else. Fortunately, court rejected those demands, upholding original sentence. At start of his prison term, David was 63 years old, having spent most part of his life free, now remaining days behind bars. Sheila's mother thanked court for not giving this monster a chance at freedom, stating if he wasn't released early 80s, her daughter would be alive today. One question remained unanswered, troubling investigators: how many other victims could there have been by Mitchell? All known crimes unconditionally bore signs of being serial, thus perpetrator might have attacked other women too, spending 25 years free outside police radar, posing higher likelihood others suffered due actions.